And can we, more than that, as Americans, talk about these places that are so vilified by our government and within our media? And I'm not talking about the places so much, I'm talking about the people, right? I'm talking about daily life within, places that most of us have never been to, especially a lot of folks in Pittsburgh have never come in contact with. So we developed the Consulate Kitchen as a way of doing that in a hyper-consolidated fashion. We change every 6 months originally. Now, this Palestinian version has been 9 months, and I continue it forever, but we like changing and letting folks know and reminding them that there's communities within our own town that they might not even recognize. We have a large Iranian community here in Pittsburgh. So, super brief, so we develop the recipes, oftentimes traveling. This is our chef, Robert, in Cuba. We disseminate information, usually using the food as this kind of vehicle. Food bypasses ideology. It's like humor, right? It bypasses your intellect. You sort of, it goes to your gut, right? The same gut response you have to a joke, to something beautiful, to something, to food, something elemental. It's an incredibly powerful tool. But it's not the product, it's not the bottom line of what we do. Really, it's kind of a mechanism, a strategy. So the staff, we talk about taking the talk show onto the street. Although days like today, when it's so crowded, it's hard to talk to anybody. That's why we try to set up other types of events. Our Afghan version, Venezuelan version, working very deeply in concert with folks in the countries we're working with, and then those communities here. It's very important that we're connecting and working, with the local communities, the expat or diasporic communities. Cuba. This is a live Skype meal between Pittsburgh and Tehran. We share a meal. This is in Tehran and in Pittsburgh. In Afghanistan, cultural festivals, education workshops. We now have 20 employees. So just a little quick backstory. So very privileged to be a professor at a great university. The Studio for Creative Inquiry is a research center that I use as a nonprofit base for the project. So we have 20 employees at this point. They all, they're not students, but they can take a free class every semester. They get a university ID. They can use all the university facilities, and they can get benefits. So it's that or become a nonprofit. It seemed to be related to the university is actually an incredible privilege to be able to do this. So moving to this more, public location was very important. We want to intersect people in their daily life. We don't want this to be the destination or the hipster joint. We're certainly happy that we have people come 3 times a week, but we want to be incredibly open and available in public. We want to bring discourse that happens in privileged spaces like this that we have with each other. We want to bring it to the public as much as we can. And it's a very challenging thing to do, but I think sometimes we're successful. Quick slides. Boom. We did the speech actually up here. So I don't want to go into too much detail because I want to just have more of a conversation. I'm just going to briefly talk about how when we opened the Palestinian version, this is our North Korean research, working with North Korean defectors. We did a project in Anyang, South Korea rather, with North Korean defectors, which for time I'm not going to go into. So, visiting Palestine, an amazing and eye-opening experience. Things but when you experience, you recognize the occupation and how it permeates all aspects of life, and how resistance takes many forms. Some overt, some just embedded in people's way of being. When a settlement looks like this across from you and steals your water, how do you, when you have graffiti on your wall, how do you deal? You keep farming for this woman. So just kind of briefly, we opened in last October, and some of you were at the event last night. discuss kind of what went down. We do taste testing. This is our friend Ahmed's mother came from Gaza and told Robert what was right and wrong about the recipes. Let's look up discerning. Wait, look at that. Oh. That's a discerning palate right there. It's like, I don't know if that even looks good. But she was great. No, she actually really loved it. She just had a few pointers. So we started doing events, and just to very briefly, we got attacked almost immediately. Before we opened, before people even knew what the hell we were. We didn't have a chance to exist. The Jewish Federation started attacking the project. Both in front of the scenes through articles, and then behind the scenes attacking all of our sponsors and collaborators. University of Pittsburgh co-sponsored events with us, and now they no longer work with us. The local papers started to write things. Conflict Kitchen's Palestinian focus criticized as one-sided. Op-ed pieces appeared in which students said that they never felt so uncomfortable in their hometown. A student who actually works for the Jewish Federation, by the way. The Jewish Federation sends out these tweets. Students feel incited against. Now it's multiple students. The public, most of the public, even the Jewish community here, the larger Jewish community of which I am a member of, perfectly fine. And incredibly supportive and curious and open. And if you were down there today, you saw a huge line of people lining up for Palestinian food. But the Jewish Federation kept at it, so, saying that we were calling for death to Israelis and Jews. Incredibly inflammatory. Then writing articles in Israeli newspapers. And then it becomes U.S. Jews outraged over Pittsburgh restaurant. This is all of us. All the Jews in the room. Outraged. And then they try to, we're federally funded, which is not true. 95% of our income comes from food sales. We get a little bit of money from some local foundations. One is the Heinz Endowments, Heinz Ketchup. They fund this very conference. But Fox News got a hold of that, and the Secretary of State's married to Teresa Heinz. That Secretary of State's giving Conflict Kitchen money. And I'm getting phone calls. People you fucking ISIS-loving terrorist. I can't believe John Kerry is funding you. And I'm I would love to get John Kerry money. I am not seeing any, I don't think that's happening. And then Breitbart, it gets to this kind of strange zone that no one could imagine, and then it crosses over into the mainstream. And the way it crossed over was that the B'nai B'rith, which is one of the largest Jewish organizations in the world, requested that the Heinz Endowments disavow their previous support to Conflict Kitchen. Because we're bundling anti-Israeli propaganda. The viewpoints of Palestinians, they might not be entirely on board with what Israel governmental policy is. Wow. That's a shocker. You didn't think when we presented Iran or North Korea or Cuba, there were opinions that people didn't agree with? Huh. I guess Palestine's different, obviously, and many of us know in the room. But the unfortunate thing, it's one thing for people to attack us and call us anti-Semitic and hate speech, and etc. It's another for a progressive local foundation to cave to that. So the president of the Heinz Endowment stated, "Want to be especially clear that its current program in Palestine was not funded by the endowments," which is not true. We would not fund such a program because it appears terribly at odds with the mission of promoting understanding. So you're promoting understanding if you talk about Venezuelans. If you talk about Palestinians, that's not promoting understanding, that's promoting hate and anti-Semitism, is basically what the Heinz Endowment is agreeing with. That is said by B'nai B'rith, the Zionists of America, or the Jewish Federation. I also want to be clear that it emphatically does not agree with or support either the anti-Israeli sentiments on its food wrappers, the material we give out, a refusal to incorporate Israeli or Jewish voices in its material. Well, ironically, a Jew owns this Palestinian restaurant. That was sort of looked over. We commend the endowments. We hope they'll vet future applicants. This public disavow of this particular recipient could be instructive and powerful tool. That's dangerous stuff, right? We have a huge foundation that's just validated, lobbying groups, political interests, and then a week later, and then what's going on behind the scenes is the Jewish Federation is attacking my university, the president of the university, the marketing director, my dean. They go to the University of Pittsburgh. They attack all of our sponsors. And they're shivering. I got to say, my university was shivering when the Heinz Endowments, the Heinz College was right down the street. They didn't want me to make a public statement about it at the time. They didn't know how to deal with it. Let's do this behind the scenes. And I'm like, it's my project. I think Dawn and I can speak freely about it. 1 week later, we got a death threat in the mail. And I cannot say that it is not, I don't do a double negative, it is a byproduct of the rhetoric that was created out there in the world about what we're doing. I said this last night. We're not, our situation is not unique. And I'm not, when I present this, it is sort of as an example of what people are dealing with throughout this country and multiplied in Palestine. It is instructive that it happens all the time. The Klinghoffer, right, debate in New York. Lots of things are happening around. Emily was, eloquently speaking about the issues that she's dealt with. And so, and a death threat is crazy. And I have employees, and the death threat was quite real and quite specific and scary and also ridiculous and sad. We closed, and people started posting notes of support. There were a couple of rallies held, and then we opened eventually after a week working with police. And then letters started to, appear claiming that we're in violation of the law and we could risk losing federal funding. This was a letter to the president of Carnegie Mellon, telling them to withdraw support, financial and otherwise, from Consulate Kitchen, from the Zionists of America. So the byproduct is the Heinz Endowments. Well, I'm probably never going to see money from them again. Although, ironically, I got an Artist Achievement Award from them 3 months before we opened the Palestinian version. And I had a leverage to tell them that I'm going to use all the money to continue the Palestinian version and to ask them to add a freedom of expression clause to all their bylaws and contracts, which is still an ongoing conversation. We'll talk a little bit about that. University of Pittsburgh, no longer working with us. World Affairs Council won't work with us. Giant Eagle, who's the largest private employer in the area, pulled all of its money from the Sprout Fund, which is an organization that funds this conference, and also made a measure. One of the son of the Giant Eagle made a measure to the Sprout Fund. He was on the board to disavow Conflict Kitchen. They would not do it, and he resigned from the board. The father, who owns Giant Eagle, is a trustee emeritus at Carnegie Mellon University. My dean told me last week that he said, I'm taking all my money out because of that Conflict Kitchen thing. Now, thank God, I don't have to, it's not my problem. I mean, I'm in an incredibly privileged space to say, I can continue to exist. We make enough money through this project, through the support from the public, to maintain what we're doing. The university's got its issues. The Heinz Endowment has its issues. They have their battles that they would love for me to feel. I do not care. That's their battles to fight. They need artists, right? They need artists like us who are not beholden to the same interests that they are beholden to, because there's compromises that they have to make. And I understand their compromises, but thank God I don't have to make them. And it was that rare crystallizing moment of why art, this irrational thing, should be in the world, is to occupy these zones in our society that are uncomfortable, sometimes dangerous, and autonomous. And it's sometimes quite difficult to do so. So, just going to, I think, end with that so we can chat. Thanks. Just we'll show some kanafa.
So, just to step back a little bit from the Palestinian iteration go back to some of the kind of big picture pieces of your work. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of this phrase cultural exchange, which comes up a lot in the kind of writing around the work that you do, and also, in interviews and stuff, this phrase comes up a lot. So what does that mean to you? What does that phrase mean to you? How do you enact that in your work? And how might it be different kind of from a more commonly held perception of that phrase?
Right. I think the work that I do is, I'm interested in nonfiction, but how it's the construction of nonfiction, the construction of true stories. And so when you think of cultural exchange, like when I think of it, really I'm thinking of occupying a fictional space. Mm-hmm. That we're negotiating together this kind of reality. But I never, and I guess the way I use the term fiction is that it's playful, right? Mm-hmm. You don't get bogged down by these kind of these absolutisms and these polarities and these simplicities and the lack of nuance. I think when you can think of some, the stories we tell to ourselves and we tell to each other and that are culturally told to, or that construct cultural communities or national communities, they're fictions. Mm-hmm. A nation is a fiction. And I think I approach it that way because it makes it more malleable. Mm-hmm. And so when I work with people, I try to get them on board to, recognizing some things we should very much take serious and some things we shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And, it's sometimes taking, various identity markers overly serious creates this us and them dynamic. Right? It creates the tension, creates the conflict. It's, there it is. It's the way our brains are constructed, thus manifest in the way in which our social actions are constructed. And, to me, the way art occupies that exchange is by bringing a less rational negotiation into play so that we're not just playing upon the kind of, tropes of fear.
Right. And I think there's something in that about what we know and what we think we know and what we know we don't know and how
the
those things,
unknowns.
The known knowns and the unknown unknowns and, and how we kind of construct that. And I think, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot in relationship to many of your projects is the effort to go. Or the very real realization that you're not going.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been to Tehran. Right. Just putting that out there as the first thing. And playing on the cultural imaginary that kind of evolves out of that, right? And so there's something also to me that's very important about, when one is working across borders in this very intentional way of kind of approaching that with some kind of humility. This third space that you're kind of talking about creating. It's humor, but there's also humility there. It's it's this balance and almost kind of taking on the knowledge and the importance of taking on the personal aspect of getting to know people as people and not as their nationality necessarily.
A lot of the projects are just platforms, right, for other people to talk. So if you think about the Brazilian project or even the Shanghai project, it's really just like this catalyst or platform that's put out in the world, and then it's fully activated not by me and what I know, because I know I don't know a lot. And so oftentimes, especially, I'm always in situations where I don't know a lot. So throw a catalyst out there and then, have a structure that can essentially capture the chaos that ensues, around it. But, a frame for it, so it doesn't just become unwieldy. So in that way, I get to be honest, I get around having to make all these judgments about, what I know. I don't know what images are going to come up with never been to Tehran. I'm fine if they're really completely off base or super weird or, whatever. And really it's just the platform. So I think a lot of the works kind of function as these platforms for systems to take place. And in that way, I'm actually experiencing something as an artist, right, through the work. I mean, the Consulate Kitchen is amazing in that I get to experience so much as an artist, not just from traveling, but from just being there and having people come up every day and talking to them. And it's a great space to exist within and learn from. And a lot of the projects, most, like in Copenhagen, I didn't really know what people were going to want to protest or, to speak about. And so that all became kind of visualized. And obviously it's kind of coursing just underneath everything, but, it's just giving it a amplification device of some sort.
Yeah, and I think there's something confessional in all of that. I mean, you use that word also, and it was funny that I had that in my notes. The kind of confessional aspect of what your invitation is for participation, where, in a way, it doesn't matter. You're inviting the public to participate in something that will net up.
Yeah.
Like
that'll
the swan,
transform.
that'll transform,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily important what the individual statements are, but as they come together.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. I like the kind of this. I mean, just us being on this, 3 steps up. There's some transformation of who we are and what we're doing. That happened really in the waffle shop. There would be like one person in the restaurant and 2 people on stage, like playing it out.
Performing it.
Yeah, and like we were streaming it live online, but no one was watching half the time, and that like very thin space that you need to confess or to
or even just to articulate your own assumptions about whatever the topic is. I mean, I think that you're creating platforms for people to be able to express that, and they're kind of okay with even being incorrect, or they become. It somehow becomes neutralized. The incorrectness of
right.
it.
I think the incorrectness, like the Obama. For those of you here in the beginning, when Obama was reading the speech by these Cubans, I mean, there are a lot of like factually incorrect stuff was stated.
Yeah.
Which is lovely to hear that from the American president. And I think we talk a lot at Consulate Kitchen about acknowledging our ignorances as being a really important first step. It's difficult to say, like, I don't know anything about Palestine, and it's uncomfortable for me to be incorrect about it or make an assumption. And I think there needs to be a place where, like, it's okay, whatever. I mean, a lot of us don't know things, and let's just see if we can play it out.
Well, and that's also a lot more honest than
way more honest
than sitting here and making statements that don't make sense.
Yes.
And I think I was thinking a lot about the Obama Chavez project in the sense that you're basically using those public figures as screens for people to project their own opinions about whatever that situation is.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like they're also avatars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, like The Foreigner.
The challenge with working with people who are, just like folks who aren't involved in art or performance is how to not only get them to speak about things in ways that are heartfelt, but to then, re-portray them in ways that aren't flat.
Right.
And to, I think a lot of people knew, we did tell folks, like, what you said would be to Obama, he would tell you, anything you tell me, I'm going to turn it into a speech. So there was that moment, like, ooh, I could speak through you.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of agency or acceleration that occurs in that way. But the challenge is how to get people to, like the waffle shop had this great way. It was very close to reality, but it was just above. There was just this slight moment of absurdity that transformed what they were saying. And that type of storytelling, when it's all nonfiction and getting people in and it's all in public, is hard to do to get people to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So a lot of the mechanisms are really strategies of attention, which are defaults of walking into the Carnegie, because you turn on your attention. So that's the public space challenge that we all kind of deal with.